everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video reviewing some of my most favourite films ever, and in this edition we will focus on the stunning and imaginative comic book sequel Batman Returns. Released in June the 19th, 1992, it stars Michael Keaton, Danny DeVito, Michelle Pfeiffer and Christopher Walken, and it was directed by Tim Burton. It is of course a sequel to the 1989 original, which was a massive cultural blockbuster in that year, so influential in the reinvigoration of the comic book movie genre and introducing much more of that brooding, dark, gothic style to the various adaptations. Now the setup and story within Batman Returns is that we are based in Gotham City again, with Batman now as the established protector of the city against the criminal elements. We see the emergence of the two established villains throughout the story, Oswald Cobblepot, otherwise known as the Penguin. We see in the beginning of the movie he's born disfigured, thrown into the sewer at birth by his parents, and growing up in an underground fairground in the care of penguins. He emerges later wanting to reclaim his birthright, and he gets manipulated later on into running for the mayor of the city. The second villain of the story is Selina Kyle, who starts off as a lonely secretary. She's not respected or appreciated in the office at all, and she comes under attack from Max Schreck, learning of his power plant objectives, and she's thrown out of a window, and then we see her being revived, and she later on transforms into Catwoman, and that change, she unleashes her intensity and anger on society and proceeds to create chaos within Gotham City. Now I simply love Batman Returns so much. It truly is a vivid and fully immersive comic book movie in every sense of the word. If the original introduced that more dark, gothic, atmospheric comic book sequel, then this sequel amplifies that tone even more. Aesthetically, it's a wonderful mix of beauty, darkness, grandiosity and weirdness, and also the bizarre. I just love all of the city sets and landscapes of Gotham City, where we have these towering skyscrapers consistent of these Greek godlike statues and gothic gargoyles, where we have the city designed so wonderfully shrouded in this winter background, mixing in very much with the Christmas setting throughout the story. Now director Tim Burton, as we all know, is a clear visionary, and he loves to create these different otherworldly elements and environments throughout his movies. We can see that all the way right throughout his career, and his sensibilities are perfect for the Batman universe. Batman's world, in my opinion, should be weird looking. It should be vast and dark and bizarre. It should have this other worldliness about it. It's this other realm of bizarreness that only Batman can exist in and truly understand, and try to track down all of these psychotic villains running amok within the city. It clearly shouldn't be a more realistic, grounded city, what we saw particularly with the Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, because that takes away a lot of the style and the essence of what Batman truly is. I understand that there should be a certain realistic tone to the character. After all, he doesn't have any superpowers, but what makes the Burton films, and particularly Batman Returns, so special is that they really made Batman such a distinguishable character in terms of the world that he inhabits, in terms of his costume and the various arsenal of weaponry that he has at his disposal. Despite the outlandishness and the overindulgence, Tim Burton managed to instill enough seriousness and intensity that it never becomes cheesy or campy. This transfers all the way through to the characters, and all actors here are amazing in their roles. Michael Keaton returns as Batman / Bruce Wayne, of course, and his version has always been much more of an assured, very intelligent and confident, building much on a great foundation from the first film. He's a much more of a calmer, mature version of a Bruce Wayne and a Batman. If we compare to the Nolan films, they tried to go for much more of a psychologically damaged version of the character, but Michael Keaton's interpretation is one that has far more conviction, both in the role as Bruce Wayne and as Batman. And I think there was a continuation what we saw from the first Batman movie, where we see now he's far more comfortable in handling both the dual identities of Batman and Bruce Wayne. Now yes, it can be argued that his presence has been overshadowed by the livelier villains, of course, but in many ways that's what's needed, because Batman, in comparison to the villains, is a much more of a grounded counterpoint, a much more of a silent presence, which gives a certain aura and elicits a far more conviction and confidence within the character. Now if you go behind the scenes, Michael Keaton allegedly suggested that he have lesser lines to embody that sense of confidence within the character. Sometimes you say more when you say less, and I think that's one of the most interesting elements about the role of Batman, and I think Michael Keaton plays it brilliantly overall. I also like the fact that in this sequel we gave Batman far more in terms of gadgets and guns. We can see first off from the armor that he has, the costume, they've retrofitted it to give it a much more of a futuristic, bolder look about it. We see in certain scenes where he uses the Batarang in a very standout sequence against the Red Triangle gang. We have other sequences where he uses the almost it's like a bat glider to glide through Gotham City and turn away the emergence of flying bats around. I love all that visual flavour about the character, and it's always good that they add more elements in terms of his capabilities. But of course we have two phenomenal standout performances in the roles of the antagonists within this film. And first of all, we talk about Danny DeVito as Oswald Cobblepot stroke the Penguin, and this is truly a fascinating, complex character. In the beginning, he's a very sympathetic and almost an empathetic character. We look at his appearance, he's got this very hideous, very almost Quasimodo-like type of build. But in the beginning, we learn, as I mentioned before, that he wants to learn about his heritage and reclaim his birthright. So that's where a lot of the sympathy comes from. But in many ways, he's also a kind of a monstrous and vulgar personality. We have these very violent scenes and crude scenes where we see when he's being introduced at the mayor and he's very much showing sexual desires to some of the female staff within a political party. And then we have that really vicious scene when he bites off one of the campaigners' nose as well. So he's very much of a fractured character. He's very much of an obsessive character, I would say, as well. And we see that in particular throughout the story, where he becomes much more seduced as he gains higher status in terms of the mayor, and he gains much more celebrity fame. And we look at this character and we ask ourselves, is he a monster or is he a victim? Is he misunderstood? And it's a fantastic characterization, and it's incredibly played by Danny DeVito, perhaps a stand-up performance in his career, which primarily consisted of more comedic roles when we look in his early days in a television series as Taxi, and we later on go to such iconic comedies such as Tin Men with Richard Dreyfuss, later on with Throw Mama Off the Train with Billy Crystal, and of course with Twins in Arnold Schwarzenegger as well. But so this was really a much more of a diverse and really extreme direction and change in terms of the roles that he played previously, and it's a wonderful, magnificent performance. If Danny DeVito is amazing, then it's perhaps even superseded by Michelle Pfeiffer's role as Catwoman. Now, when we talk about Catwoman, it is simply one of the greatest comic book interpretations of a character that I think we've ever seen within comic book movies, and it actually improves on the source material overall. In the original Inception, Selina Kyle basically just steals jewels and is a thief, and she's overall just the female love interest of Batman. But in Batman Returns, there is so much more creative direction that they've taken with the character. In this version, Selina Kyle starts off as a lonely outcast. She's living a very mundane life as a secretary working for Max Schreck. We see the early scenes when she's coming home on her own, listening to her answer machine. She gets lectures from her mother, she gets rejected by her boyfriend going on a skiing trip. So again, she's very undervalued, and we sympathise with that, particularly when we get the scenes back in the office when she makes certain suggestions and she's kind of mocked at and laughed at overall. So she's very shy and she's very introverted, so we very much are sympathising with this character. And then we get the stunning transformation into Catwoman, and it truly is a vivid metamorphosis for a character, where we see the cats are reviving her in a very quite gruesome scene overall. She then returns to her apartment all wounded and broken, all pale, and then she just completely loses it before making the suit. It's an incredible scene, made even more fantastic by the incredible music from Danny Elfman as well. Truly is a stand-up moment. And of course, this is all fueled by Michelle Pfeiffer, who is simply phenomenal as Catwoman. Her version here, she's extremely dark, freaky, vengeful, extremely hot, extremely sexy, with clear nymphomaniac tendencies, all exhibited particularly in the scenes that she has with Batman. And Michelle Pfeiffer clearly fires and lights up the screen. She looks fabulous in the infamous skin-tight vinyl costume, again superior to the comic versions where we see it assembled with very much white stitches overall. And it truly is an imaginative character. We see multiple scenes where she supposedly dies and she loses one of the 9 lives of the cat, and she's counting those instances down. It's just such a memorable, such a force of nature, really, when we look at Michelle Pfeiffer. So glad in many sense when we look at the behind the scenes of the movie that Sean Young couldn't get the role because she was pregnant at the time. So I think it was kind of the fate of the gods that we managed to land Michelle Pfeiffer, who is a wonderful actress, one of the greatest actresses I would say throughout the 1980s, and here this is perhaps her most incredible performance as Selina Kyle. I did also like the similar character perspectives, in particular with Selina and Bruce, two people here struggling to build their relationships while handling their alter egos, and this is where we get some nice interplay and chemistry between the two lead actors. Of course, this was made further interesting that in real life both of them had previously had a relationship together. We get certain scenes here where they meet up for dinner and then they suddenly have to break it up because they have to change into their roles. It just provides those lighter moments, giving us some humour but not in a cheesy and campy way as what we would see later on within the Batman franchise. So that was a welcome play, and it's skillfully handled by both of the professional actors. There's really is also a juxtaposition between both Penguin and Catwoman. I feel that both are outcasts and victims, and really they are lashing out at society in many ways. This again gives that complexity and distinctiveness and outlandish nature, and really mixed in with craziness that Burton brought so much to the Batman villains in both films overall. In terms of talking about villains, we also have to talk about what I feel is the real villain and the mastermind of the overall movie, and that is Max Schreck, played brilliantly by Christopher Walken, who I've stated so much in previous movie reviews is one of the all-time greats in playing very villainous characters. And here is Max Schreck. He's completely savvy, he's very smart, he thinks quickly on his feet. He's really more of this highly regarded, beloved celebrity figure of Gotham. We see that very much in the opening scenes at the Christmas presentations, but at the same time he's that typical corporate cutthroat, very ruthless but also politely spoken intelligent personality, and he is essentially the creator of both Penguin and Catwoman. We see that where he manipulates Oscar Cobblepot into becoming mayor so he can take down the actual mayor of City, and of course he has to try and destroy Selina Kyle because she discovers his plans about his power plant. So it's an amazing and fantastic performance from Christopher Walken overall. And I think when we look at the overall dynamic between Max Schreck, Penguin and Catwoman, we really have to ask, in terms of the Batman villains, is it really that society itself that creates these villains? You have to really look at these characters and feel if they were just a bit more accepted, with a bit more love and care and attention, they wouldn't necessarily turn out to be the villainous, crazy personalities that they are. And this is what makes Batman Returns so special. And as with the original movie, Danny Elfman's musical score is such a special ingredient, fusing wonderfully with the version and vision that Burton gives overall. Along with the main iconic theme, we have great scenes of his musical score, particularly when we see Penguin discovering his parents' grave. As I mentioned before, we see Selina Kyle's transformation into Catwoman, and essentially the final climatic, I would say 10 to 15 minutes, concerning both the final arcs of both Penguin and Catwoman. And this is where Danny Elfman's musical score really gives that epic, grandiose feel to it. It really is fantastic, certainly in the final 3 to 4 scenes of this movie overall, and it really complements so much of what is really a dark gothic fantasy, and many instances a fairy tale vision that Tim Burton has presented on here, and Danny Elfman's music supplements that vision so much overall. Now, as much as I love Batman Returns, there are certain criticisms that I feel are valid arguments about the film. So for example, there is a certain lack of action or standout sequences, minus the sequence where we see the Batmobile being under control from Oswald and it's running around the Gotham City causing all sorts of chaos. We have that great scene when it's running through all the cars and they're bouncing off the Batmobile. But in terms of the action sequences, they're not really too distinctive in terms of the fight choreography overall. They're very coherent, but they're not exceptional or exhilarating overall. So that's a criticism I can take before the movie. And also, there isn't really a central focalized plot. So if we look at the original movie, yes, Joker was much more of a psychotic character causing chaos, but we did have that through line of Batman wanting to seek revenge for the murder of his parents. We don't quite get that element here in Batman Returns. It's very much of a wider range in terms of more its characterization rather than the actual plot and storyline overall. There's no overall quest to take over the city or blow up certain people on here, so maybe you could argue that doesn't have the same kind of muscular momentum and the epic spectacle that we got within the first movie overall. So if I had to give an overall score for Batman Returns, I would give it a 9.5 out of 10. A truly immersive and stunning dark gothic fantasy, and one of those cases I believe where we have a superior sequel to the original. So when we look at the overall box office release of Batman Returns, it was a big commercial success, opening with a back then record-breaking opening weekend of 45.6 million, eventually going on to gross over 266.8 million on an 80 million budget. Despite this success, Warner Brothers wasn't completely satisfied with the return of the sequel, because it was quite a significant drop from the first film, which managed to gross over 400 million worldwide on its release. Now, many reasons for this is of course that many cited the very dark and sexualized tone, which may have turned away some mainstream audiences, in particular parents, in feeling it was inappropriate for children. There was of course the famous incident of where McDonald's had closed all of their promotional ties with the movie because of the backlash from parents outlining its concerns. Now, I never quite understood this backlash on one element, because it was following from the first film, which was not a kids film either. That was very much the same as this sequel in terms of its grittiness and its darkness and its violence overall. So I'm not quite sure why people were expecting Batman Returns to be much more of a childlike friendly sequel. I don't quite understand that. It was very clear from the outset that was following the same tone as the original, and the studio must have realised this because they really gave Tim Burton near enough full creative control. So he was really following in the same style as this first film, so I don't understand why they were expecting this much more kid-friendly adventure. Now, despite the backlash overall on Batman Returns, its legacy has continued to grow throughout the years, and I think now general consensus is most people agree that it is superior to the original movie, and it's far more better than what followed afterwards, when we later on had the misguided Joe Schumacher direction of the franchise with both Batman Forever in 1995 and then later on with Batman and Robin in 1997. And this is when the studio, Warner Brothers, really make the massive mistake of doing a massive course correction and taking away all of the dark, intense gothic sensibilities from both of Burton's films and going for a much more kid-friendly, campy, cheesy like tone for these movies. Despite gaining a bigger box office return, it really took away so much what was so distinctive and so special, in particularly about Batman Returns. And it's such a shame, because I truly feel we would have been delivered one of the all-time great cinematic comic book trilogies if Tim Burton was allowed to continue with his overall vision and direction for a third film overall. But despite this, Batman Returns is still for me a magnificent, and I still think it's one of the best of the Burton movies. Initially it was misunderstood by certain critics and audiences, but now I think people can fully appreciate how special and immersive and very distinguishable of a comic book movie. Okay, it's not the most action packed and spectacular, but it's far more complex and layered and substantial and much more interesting, I feel, in terms of its characterization, and of course it's fueled by two phenomenal and many ways iconic performances from both Danny DeVito and Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. So a truly magnificent and epic comic book sequel, superior in Batman Returns. So those are my thoughts and feelings on the sequel of Batman Returns. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you've indeed watched the movie, how do you think it compares to the first film overall? Do you think it's superior? Do you think it's inferior? Like me, would you have liked to see a third film directed by Tim Burton continuing the tone and direction set by Batman Returns overall? How do you think the franchise would have fared if he did manage to continue this vein? And how do you also think it compares to later iterations of what we saw from Christopher Nolan, and most recently of course with Ben Affleck in Zack Snyder's version of the character as well? So those are my thoughts and feelings on Batman Returns. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit those like and subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content and movie reviews like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.